Hi, welcome back. Our next lecture will be on variables and expressions. So in this lecture, we'll be talking about assigning values to variables, different expressions, and shortcuts that we can, in syntax that we can use to express things that we'll be doing quite often. So variable assignment. Right? What we want to do is take values that we want to work with and store them into variables that we can modify, pass around, or reuse later. And we can do that using the assignment operator, which in JavaScript is the equal sign. So, for example, we say let my num being the variable, be assigned the value 5. So let my num be assigned 5. Now, oftentimes people will read this as let my num equal 5. Now, while that's also an accurate reading of it, I think it's much more efficient to think of it as let my num be assigned 5. And we'll see some cases where using the word equal might be confusing. Now, if we do a console log of my num, we should expect to see the value 5, right? We've passed my num into a console log, and my num is storing the value 5. Now, a quick note, that let keyword, it's relatively new in JavaScript, probably just a couple years old. And what it does is it creates a variable that can be assigned values and be reassigned values, right? So that value that we just created, my num, can be given the value, be assigned the value 5, but also be reassigned other numbers. So for example, in here, we use let mood being the variable, be assigned the value of happy. Now here in the next line of code, we say, well, take that variable and reassign it the value of overjoyed. Now you notice in this one, we didn't use the word let because let created the variable on line 5. We don't need to recreate a variable, we're reassigning the previous variable. Now if we console log mood here, we'll get the value overjoyed. There's another keyword that also creates variables, so that's the const keyword, const being short for constant. And what it does is it stores the assigned value into that constant variable, but then that variable cannot be reassigned. So for example, if we say const favorite bootcamp equals full stack, or excuse me, is assigned the value of full stack, and then we say, okay, take that variable favorite bootcamp, assign it the value of somewhere else, and we run this, we'll get an error, the syntax error saying that we're trying to assign a variable we're trying to assign a new value to a constant variable, right? And so the reason that the creators of JavaScript and the maintainers of JavaScript added this is it's a way for you as a programmer to express, hey, I'm creating a variable here. I want this variable to hold one value and one value only and not be reassigned by myself in the program or by other people who might be modifying my program in the future. All right, so variable assignment is pretty easy. It's the equal sign, and the equal sign just says, take whatever's on the right, whatever the right evaluates to, and store it into the variable that I'm creating on the left. All right, so what are the things that can be on the right? So those are what we call expressions, right? So an expression is any piece of code that can resolve down to a value. And you'll see why this makes sense is that we want to assign some value into a variable, right? And what we say is that we can assign any expression. And the reason we can assign any expression, because anything on the right of an assignment will eventually resolve down to a value to be stored by that variable. All right, so you'll see here, the definition is any valid unit of code that resolves to a value, and that's from MDN. MDN is the Mozilla Developer Network. It's a great set of documentation. If you look for MDN, you'll see it in a lot of the documentation searches that you do. So here if we do a console log of 15 and a console log of 9 equal to 10. So in the first one, we are console logging out a number. In the second one, this is a little confusing because like, is this a number or is this, it's not really a number because we have that triple equal sign in there. And then here we have a piece of Here we have a happy plus an empty string plus together. So these pieces look like code. They're not just a single value. So what we do if we run this is we get 15 false and happy together, right? Because what console log is expecting a final value that it can output, right? And these expressions all evaluate to one specific value that comes out. So let's go over what exactly that means. So 15, 15 doesn't have, it's a piece of code in JavaScript. It doesn't really have to evaluate to anything. It's just the value 15. Now the next line, line 6, 9 equal to 10. Now that's a piece of code, right? So that's not just the value 9, not just the value 10. It's a piece of code saying, take this number 9 and see if it is equal to the value 10. So this is why I said earlier that it's better to use a single equal sign as saying assign, because you have this triple equal that actually means test if these two things are equal on the left and right. So this will evaluate to what we call a Boolean expression, true or false. So does 9 equal 10? Of course not. That's why we get the value false. And JavaScript first evaluates the expression to get that false, and then passes that false value to console log, and console log outputs that. And of course, in line 8, we have happy plus space plus together. That is an expression that evaluates down to a single string that is happy space together. So since expressions result in a value, expressions are what can be assigned to variables. So if we say sum, let the variable sum that I'm creating be assigned the value of 10 plus 5. Right? So an incorrect way to read this is let sum be assigned 10 and then add 5. Right? We're saying that let sum be assigned this expression 10 plus 5. If we console log out, we expect to get the value 15. Right? So, as we write code, to know how it works, we have to anticipate how JavaScript will evaluate our expressions, right? How does JavaScript think about converting an expression into a value? So for mathematics, it's something we've been looking so far, you have to recall the order of operations that we learned in 7th or 8th grade math, right? So that multiplications and divisions have a higher precedence than addition and subtraction, right? So in this, what that means is that in this line 6, the multiplication happens before the addition, right? It's a higher precedence. So if we say, let the variable not sure be assigned the expression 10 plus 5 times 10, right? If we console log, we should expect not the value 150, which would be 10 plus 5, 15 times 10, 150, but the value of 60, right? We do 10 plus 5 times 10 first, so 10 plus 50 equals 60. So JavaScript has a similar concept to order of operations called operator precedence. So all the different operators that can be in an expression, those include all the math signs, calling functions, creating variables. All of those things have a precedence, and JavaScript has to evaluate those in the order of what it calls operator precedence, right? So math operators are simple because they're applied in a way that's very intuitive to us in how we read it. Because most people who've studied some level of algebra have a pretty good kind of innate sense of mathematical precedence, right? So JavaScript shares that. So in this, take a second to think about this. Let the variable not sure be assigned 10 times 10 divided by parentheses 5 times 5. And if you guess the value of 4, you'd be correct, right? So we do 10 times 10, 100, and we divide that by not the value 5 and then multiply 5, but the value of 5 times 5, which is 25. So we get 100 divided by 25, the value 4. Now here, if we get rid of those parentheses, you see that now we do it just in the order of 10 multiplied by 10, which is 100, divided by 5, which is 20, multiplied by 5, which again is 100. So here we get the value 100. So parentheses here should have a higher precedence than all of the other multiplication divide operators, right? So it's just something you have to be aware of. It should be pretty intuitive for math expressions because it's the stuff that we're already used to doing in our day-to-day math. So, as in math, JavaScript expressions wrapped in parentheses are evaluated first. Now let's take a little bit of a more abstract example with parentheses and see if we can figure out what's going on. Here we say, let the variable not sure be assigned the expression false equals parentheses 10 not equal to 10, right? So if we use the previous example, the first thing that will be evaluated in the expression is what's in this parentheses, 10 not equal to 10. Well, now, obviously 10 not equal to 10 is false, right? 10 is equal to 10, so if we say 10 not equal to 10, that's false. And then that, in parentheses, evaluates to false, and then we have another evaluation says, well, does false equal to false? And that is true. If we console log out not sure, we get true. Because what happened here is, first what happens in the parentheses, we get that is false, and then false triple equals false becomes true. So it's interesting, you can use parentheses to, elevate the precedence of any expression that can be evaluated, not just mathematical expressions. Here, we're elevating the precedence of this this Boolean expression, right? Is these two things equal or not equal to each other? All right, so there are well-defined rules that define the precedence of these operators, right? Parentheses, periods, multiplication, division, calling functions. So if you search for in Google MD and operator precedence, there's a nice table. You don't need to memorize the whole thing. Over time, you'll find that it becomes pretty intuitive, the things you're doing, right? So there's a few edge cases that might be confusing, but you won't encounter them early on in your programming experience. So for example here, we get type of 10 equal to 10. So this type of is a high precedence thing. So this type of 10 will return the value of number, right? So type of is higher, this type of 10 is higher precedence than 10 equals 10 equal 10. But here, if we do type of 10, what that returns in JavaScript is the string with the value of number, right? So we read this as type of 10 is number, and does the string number equal the value 10? And that answer is false. Right now, if type of had a lower precedence than the triple equal sign, the way you might read that is, well, does 10 equal 10? That comes out as true, and the type of true is Boolean, right? So then you would get the value of Boolean, right? And the reason that doesn't happen is because type of is a very high precedence operator. All right, we want to cover some shortcuts that you'll see, and it's not important that you use these. It's more important that you know them because you'll see them a lot in code, and just don't want you to get tripped up as you're working through different examples. So if we say let sum be assigned the value 0, we want to change it, we can say, well, now sum be assigned the value of sum plus 5, right? And so what we do is we evaluate what's on the right side first. So we say, okay, well, what's the expression sum plus 5? That's going to be 5. And then we'll assign that to sum. So now sum is 5. Then we do sum equals sum plus 10. Now we say, well, what's the value of sum? In this case, it's 5 plus 10 is 15. And then assign 15 into the value sum. Now if we console log out sum, we should expect to get the value of 15. Now, this is just a little bit cumbersome. So JavaScript gives you a plus equal operator. The plus equal operator just sums and reassigns, right? So instead of having to have sum on both sides of sum equal to sum plus something, we can just do sum equal to 0, sum plus equal to 5. And this will do something of, sum plus equal to 5 is exactly the same as sum equals sum plus 5. And that works for multiplication, subtraction, division, and the addition operator. So this creates the same thing that we just got by doing sum equals 0, sum plus 5, sum plus 10, and we should expect to get the value of 15. The last operator you should know about is the plus plus operator. This operator, if you ever heard of C and C++, it's an operator that just means increment by 1. Right? So it's not just if a joke is like, this is x plus plus, it just means that it's a next version of it, but not just an increment by 1. So this increments it and reassigns a value. So for example, we say let my num equal to 0. Again, so I trip up there all the time. I say let my num be assigned 0. We do my num plus plus. We console log the string full stack is number, and then add my num, which you expect to see full stack is number 1. The minus minus is just the inverse of the plus plus operator. It decrements by 1 and reassigns. We say let my num equal to 3. My num be assigned 3. My num minus minus. Here, my num be equal to 2. My num minus minus. My num will be equal to 1. And then we do full stack is number, and we get my num full stack is number 1. All right. To do a recap, we talked about assigning values to variables, how we create variables using either let or const. Let, and the only difference is that const variables can't be reassigned, right? Whatever you assign them at creation is what they are. And we can reassign values to let variables as much as we want. Now, what can we assign to variables, right? And that's what we call expressions. Everything on the right side of that equal sign is going to be evaluated, and then whatever value that is, we can put it into the variable. And then finally, we looked at a few shortcut syntaxes, basically the plus equal, minus equal, and the plus plus minus minus. Those are used pretty often in programming just because, oftentimes we want to, for example, iterate through a loop, and we want to go from 0 to 20. We want to capture each one, so just say, hey, plus plus go to the next one. Plus, plus, go to the next one. All right, that's all there is for variables and expressions. See you next lecture.